Hi everyone, welcome to the January 8th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragon, and I'll be joined in just a moment by my co-host Craig Milkowski. Well, we're getting back to the forecast after a couple weeks off. This Friday podcast have fell on holidays the last couple weeks, so we haven't done one since the middle of December. But excited to get back into the handicapping this week. I wouldn't say that we have the most stacked weekend of stakes racing coming up. We've got a couple of graded stakes races on Saturday at Santa Anita. We'll talk about both of those, the La Cañada and the Las Ciénegas. We've got some good horses running in there, some runners that ran in Grade 1 stakes races last year, a few coming off layoffs, so we'll get to that in a little bit. Then we'll move on to Gulfstream Park, where they're running the Tropical Turf Stakes on Saturday. And then we're kind of done with the graded stakes racing. We'll move to Sunday's card at Gulfstream, where they're running a pretty interesting allowance race that's going as the 10th. We've got some horses coming out of Stakes Company in there, so we'll talk about that one. Then we'll finish things up on Sunday at Aqueduct, where the feature is the Rego Park for the 2-year-old New York breds. So, Craig, it's not the most stacked weekend of stakes racing, but we've got some good horses running at least at Santa Anita.
We do, and hey, as bettors, I think some of these are pretty decent betting races. We don't always get a bunch of Grade 1 horses to bet on, but we got some interesting contests to talk about.
Let's start things off in California with that La Cañada Stakes, Grade 3 event on Saturday. It's the 8th race on that card, going a mile and a 16th on the dirt course. And we really do have two main players in here, drawn to the number 2 and 3 post positions, those being Hard Not to Love and Fighting Mad. They finished second and third, respectively, when they were each last seen in the Zenyatta before Breeders' Cup Day last year. That was supposed to be a prep for the Breeders' Cup Distaff, though neither of them ended up running in that race. They both have strong form, certainly superior form to their rivals here. I think the real question is, which, if either, do you want off the layoff, and which do you give the advantage to?
Yeah, it's a tough call in here. I mean, they both have some question marks for sure. Fighting Mad looked like she had moved to the top of the division almost last year, ran some huge speed figures. When she moved out the 2 turns, really looked good. And then she just kind of flopped when she was beaten at 2-5 in that Zenyatta, and we haven't seen her since. Hard Not to Love, I've always had some questions about her going the 2 turns. She's run some decent races, but she's a horse who I think's only lost 1 time sprinting. So I tend to think that's her best, and I'm always against her in these route situations. So I guess if I had to pick one of those two, I would go with Fighting Mad. But I'm actually going to lean in a different direction if I have to go with a top pick, and that's to another Bob Baffert horse and Message. I really liked her race last time, where she was up kind of on a fast pace, dropped off it a little bit. She did give up the lead late and got beat by Proud Emma, who's also in this field, but I don't see as much speed. And as somebody who's looking for a little more of a price than 2 favorites who both have question marks, she was the one I landed on.
Yeah, I'm not in love with taking short prices, as you know. I had trouble going against the favorites here, though. If I had to sort them in an order, I would put Fighting Mad on top of Hard Not to Love. Like you, I've always been a little skeptical of Hard Not to Love going these longer distances. She just doesn't seem to have that same finishing kick that she possesses sprinting. I don't know why they're focusing on these longer races. She's run 2 of her best speed figures sprinting, and she's won her last 2 sprint races. As you said, won most of her sprint races. It's not like there aren't opportunities to go 1 turn in California, so not really sure why they're pursuing these longer races. But in this situation, I do prefer Fighting Mad. She did finish behind Hard Not to Love last time in Zenyatta, but that was a race that basically turned into a match race on the far turn as Harvest Moon went after Fighting Mad. They kind of sprinted away from Hard Not to Love a little bit, and they were both kind of falling apart at the end of that race. I thought Hard Not to Love, given the trip she got, she probably should have picked them both up, but she couldn't get by them. As I said, she's not the strongest finisher in these longer races. And Fighting Mad, she just feels like she's faster than these horses, both early and late. She's got superior speed figures. Bob Baffert said that he was going to back off her after that Zenyatta. It was kind of planned that she would miss this time. She reportedly wasn't training well out of that race. That's why they didn't go on to the Breeders' Cup. So coming back here, if she runs back to any of her best races, she's just going to trounce this field. And I have trouble taking another Baffert horse in this race. I mean, I don't really want anybody out of the Bayakoa to begin with. We talked about that race on the Pacecast a few weeks ago. It just seemed like a very weak Grade 3 event. I know these are both Grade 3 races. This is a much stronger race than the Bayakoa. If there was anybody out of that race that I would want to bet, it would have been the third place finisher, Stellar Sound, who made that mid-race move and is the one that forced the pace to get so fast midway through the race. She's not running in here, though. She's the one that's not coming out of that race back into this La Cañada. So I didn't want any of them. I mean, I guess you can make a case for the Chilean horse, Sinenus, who has been taking a step forward with each start for Michael McCarthy running in the Midwest. But I don't really see her being in the same class as the two favorites either. So it's fighting mad for me. Let's move on to the other graded stakes race at Santa Anita on Saturday. That's the Grade 3 Las Ciénegas, going now 6 furlongs on the newly constructed extension of the turf course at Santa Anita. And we do have the winner of this race last year who's running back. That's the number 7 Jolie Olympica, the slight favorite on the morning line. She is facing a serious rival, though, in Alexandra. These two did battle in the Monrovia last summer at Santa Anita, going a little bit shorter, 5.5 furlongs. They're facing off against here, but Jolie Olympica this time, she's coming off a layoff. Alexandra has a more recent run in the Breeders' Cup.
Yes, she does, and it was a tough race. She definitely had some traffic problems that day. This is a race where I'm going to have trouble going against those two favorites in there, and I guess if I have to pick one, it's going to be Alexandra. As you said, Jolie Olympica did beat her last time, but that was at just 5.5 furlongs. I think the 6 is going to favor Alexandra a little bit more. And I do think Jolie Olympica might face some pressure from the 5 Superstition. She is drawn outside of her, but I don't think she'll be alone up front as she has been in most of the races where she's run pretty well. So I'm going to give a slight edge to Alexandra. I guess some people might want to make a case for Lighthouse, who comes out of that win at Kentucky Downs, but we haven't seen her since then, and that seemed to be that was her career best speed figure over that obviously different course than what they're going to see here in California. So I would recommend people watch the races this weekend. I think they started today. I don't think they ran. I don't remember if they ran yesterday or not at Santa Anita. I don't think they did, but this is a new course, so it's good to see how it's been playing, and speed has certainly been a weapon. So if we see horses still going wire to wire on this course, maybe I'd change my mind and lean towards Jolie Olympica.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting situation. In both of these graded stakes we're talking about at Santa Anita on Saturday, we've got some speed horses that are uncoupled entries for the same trainer. That was the case with the Bob Baffert horses in the La Cañada, and it's the case again here with Richard Mandela training both of these speed horses in the Las Ciénegas. I mean, he's got that favorite Jolie Olympica, and as you said, he also has Superstition in this race, who seems like the other horse that could be forwardly placed. I kind of doubt that either of these are going to push each other, given that they're going out for the same barn. Obviously, I would imagine that Jolie Olympica would be content to sit off that stalemate and get first run on that leader. Alexandra, she's always at the mercy of the pace, but she does have a potent late kick when she's able to produce it. Obviously, she wasn't able to run her best race in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint last time, but not only was that a tough spot, she was coming off a long layoff into that race. I imagine that wasn't the ideal preparation for her to target that ambitious of a spot. I imagine she'll do better here with that start under her belt. And at her best, I think she's just slightly better than Jolie Olympica. I know Jolie Olympica beat her in that Monrovia last year. I think the 6 furlongs is a little bit better for Alexandra. I feel like she would have gotten her that day with a couple extra jumps. And it does feel like this extension on the turf course is almost built for a horse like Alexandra, though we'll see if closers start winning these races. As you said, there were some horses that did well up front on this course last week, although in some of the maiden races, we saw some horses coming from a little farther behind. So I don't know if I'd say that we have enough evidence to say it's playing any one way yet, but I do slightly prefer Alexandra if their prices are similar.
Yeah, we have the same feeling. That was how I thought when I looked at this race. The course just looks like it's tailor-made to a T for her. That's why I'm slightly leaning in her direction.
Let's switch venues and move down south on the East Coast to Florida, Gulfstream Park, where they're running the Grade 3 Tropical Turf Stakes on Saturday. This one is going a mile. And I did see some news on Twitter ahead of this race that Analyze It is expected to scratch. That's a pretty big scratch in this race because not only was he projected to be up close to the front in a race that could have had a contested pace, but he kind of looked like the horse to beat based on his back class and prior form. So with him coming out of this race, I think you kind of have to reassess things a little bit. And I'm not really sure who the public is going to go to. I guess on the morning line, the number one admission office inherits the lukewarm favorites role, but he's not really a horse that I want going this short.
Yeah, that's good. I was actually going to pick Analyze It in here, but I didn't love him. So the scratch, it doesn't bother me all that much, but thanks for letting me know. I definitely was against admission office just for the reasons that you said. I don't really think he wants any parts of just this mile distance, particularly on that Gulfstream Park turf course, which is pretty kind of speed most days. So I would look elsewhere. The first horse that kind of jumped out at me was Frostmorn. He's shown a lot of talent throughout his career. He's won some decent races, graded stakes winner, particularly when he was 3. But he came back when changing barge last time to Eddie Keneally and ran a big 126 TimeformUS speed figure. But the more I look at that race, it was just a complete merry-go-round. I don't think there was much change in position other than a couple real long shots in that race drop back to last. But otherwise, the horses who actually were contenders basically ran in the same order all the way around the track. So I'm going to dismiss that one a little bit. And the horse I eventually landed on is who would have been my main contender to Analyze It was Casa Creed, the 2 horse for Bill Mott. He comes out of that Breeders' Cup Mile where he frankly just didn't have much of a shot, in my opinion. But before that, I thought he was developing really nicely. I thought he ran a big race in the Grade 1 Shabwell at Keeneland. And he's the one I think is going to run. And he won't be the 8-1 that he is on the morning line, particularly with the scratch of Analyze It. But I still think he's going to be a decent price in that 4-1, 9-2 range.
Yeah, I don't know. If I was making a line for this race, I would guess that Casa Creed's going to be the favorite here. I mean, he just has really strong form. He was just about 20-1 in the Breeders' Cup Mile last time, and that's because he was just off the board in the Shadwell Turf. I mean, he placed in that Grade 1 4-star day. If he just has going this mile distance, he just has obviously the strongest form. So I agree, he's the horse to beat. I think that 8-1 is wishful thinking. We'll see how the trips work out. I do think Frostmorn is an interesting horse to discuss for all the reasons that you pointed out. I have the same skepticism that you did about him being able to repeat that last speed figure, especially given the presence of Tusk in this race, because Tusk just looks like the kind of horse that does want to be forwardly placed when he runs his big races. You don't really know what you're going to get from him. He actually won this race last year and has only made 1 start since then. I think that this tropical turf maybe came up slightly tougher this time, and I think Tusk is a little hard to take off his return race last time, but he did show speed in that race coming back, so you'd imagine they'll use similar tactics again. And Frostmorn, the thing about him, if you watch a lot of his races, is that when he doesn't get that easy trip, easy pace, that clear lead up front, he's a horse that when they try to rate him can get extremely rank. He does not like being put in behind horses, so you'd want him to be in the clear, but he doesn't even like rating off horses even when he's outside of them. So I'm a little bit concerned about Frostmorn just kind of keeping it together and running his best race again. He's also a horse, I should mention, that has handled given the ground multiple times in the past. So I haven't looked at the weather forecast in Florida. I know that the turf has been relatively firm, so we'll see how he handles that. I went in a different direction. While I respect Casa Creed, I think he's the horse to beat. I like the number 3 Ride a Comet, and we'll see what price he is. I think he's kind of a difficult horse to peg. A price 2 because he is coming in looking a little bit slower than some of the other contenders. And I get that, but I've been very impressed visually with his last 2 races at Woodbine. We talked about him coming into that Kennedy Road last time when he looked like one of the main rivals to that win machine up in Canada, Pink Lloyd. Pink Lloyd probably didn't show up with his best effort that day, but I was really impressed with the race that Ride a Comet ran. He always looked like a winner, just showed this electrifying turn of foot coming at the top of the stretch and put that field away easily. Only won by 1.5 lengths, but just did it with the utmost ease. He's getting back to turf here and stretching out, but I'm not really opposed to that. He's won 4 of his 5 starts on the turf. He looked like a turf horse early in his career, and I think the mile distance is actually great for him. I know he seemed to improve at Woodbine going shorter, but I think a mile is certainly within his scope, and I believe he has a little more tactical speed than what the pace projector indicates. I don't think he's going to be that far out of it here. So I like Ride a Comet, and we'll see what kind of price he is.
Yeah, that the race is going to kind of come down to him and Casa Creed for me. We'll see how the prices are. As you said, I'm not putting any real stock in his speed figures. He won the last two times, but he only got a 103 and a 104. But he had run in the one teens on turf, and those speed figures the last couple times were largely a function of pace. All the fractions in both races are coated in blue, is extremely slow. He was well back in the field and still able to win. So I'm going to give him plenty of extra credit for those late runs he put in against the slow paces.
Now, I would argue that maybe the most interesting race we're going to discuss on this podcast is the one non-stakes race. That's this 10th race on the Sunday card at Gulfstream. It's an optional claiming $60,500 tag going 6 furlongs. And we've got plenty of horses in here that are dropping out of stakes company, some horses that are in good form, some horses with back class. It's a large field of 11 runners and one that could feature an honest pace. And I think that could work against the horse that I imagine will be the favorite here. That's the number 1, Mischievous Alex. He's coming off a layoff here, but he's drawn a tricky post position on the rail, and that could be difficult with speed drawn to his outside.
Yeah, we're thinking exactly the same way. I don't have the morning line in front of me. I don't think it's out for Sunday yet, but I would assume he's going to be the favorite. He's changing barns, going from John Service to Safi Joseph, who does really well with his first time acquisitions. But like you, I have my doubts. He was a horse who was in raging form in the spring. He disappeared before the Woody Stevens for a couple months, and then he just didn't look like the same horse when he stepped up in competition. He got blitzed in that Woody Stevens. He pressed a pretty fast pace in the Jerkins before packing it in. I mean, he didn't run terribly or anything, but he just didn't take those forward steps. So I think it's a lot to ask of a favorite from the rail at this shorter 6 furlong distance, where most of his success had come at the longer 7 furlong distance, to think he's going to be ready to go and take a short price. So I'm not going to do that. The horse who definitely interests me here is Cheryl Spate, chipping in from Woodbine. He was a horse who looked really good his first couple times out. He won on turf and synthetic. But for whatever reason, I always had the impression that just the way he ran and watching his races, and not just from a pace perspective, but the way he actually moves, he looks like a dirt horse to me. There's not a whole lot to go on in the breeding. His dam, Perfect Cheryl, has had several, obviously some foals, but they've all been campaign exclusively on turf. He is out at Speightstown, so that side of it thinks he can handle dirt, but I'm just going with the visual. I think he's a horse who is going to excel on dirt.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see how they bet this race. I mean, I said that I think Mischievous Alex will be favored, especially off that trainer switch. I imagine he'll take some money. But Cheryl Spite's a horse that definitely has a following, so I won't be shocked if he's relatively short in here too. He's definitely the solid second choice if he's not favored. This is a horse that they were pointing towards the Kentucky Derby at one point, or at least toying with that idea. So it's not like they haven't thought about dirt before with him. Personally, I'm not seeing dirt with this horse. He looks like more of a turf horse to me, and the dam side pedigree especially. While Speightstown is so versatile as a sire, I know some of the sibs have won on synth as well as this one, but Perfect Cheryl herself, she was a turf horse. If you go back to the second dam, Lady Cheryl, this is just a huge turf family. The dam is a half sister to Shakespeare, as well as that other good horse whose name is escaping me, Lady Shakespeare. Those are both, I think, grade 1 winners on the turf. It's just a really solid turf pedigree on the dam side. And also Roger Atfield, you can look up his stats in Formulator, going either turf or synth to dirt. He's just 2 for 30 over the past 5 years. That's 7% with an ROI that's under 60 cents. So that's just not the kind of horse that I want to bet. And I think there are others to consider in here, even if you want to be against both of these favorites. The one that I'm going to land on is the number 10, Admiral Lynch. I know that he's coming off a poor effort at Churchill Downs, but that was in the slop. That was his first time ever running over a wet racetrack, and maybe he just didn't like it. That was also a time at Churchill where they were running these 5 furlong races after they were not able to use the turf course anymore. And you had some very fast turf sprinters showing up in these 5 furlong races. I believe that turf sprinter Well Able showed up in this one, and he just kind of ran off in the early going. And all horses that would have wanted to show tactical speed in that race kind of had trouble keeping up with that pace, and Admiral Lynch was included. He was just much farther back than he really is comfortable racing and was never able to muster a rally. Prior to that, he was in pretty good form. I mean, losing that allowance race two back to Bon Raison and Maniwa, they're stakes level horses. And before that, he tried a tough spot in the De Francis. If he ever gets back to that race he ran at Saratoga over the summer, he's going to beat everybody in this field. So I just think drawing outside of the speed here, he's going to get a much better trip, and he could be a square price.
Yeah, well, it's good. We got to have a difference of opinion sometimes because I really don't like Admiral Lynch in this spot. I honestly can't remember which race it was, whether it was the De Francis or the allowance race at Keeneland where we talked about it. And to me, he looked like a cinch that day and just didn't run. I think he was projected to be all alone. It didn't turn out that way. And so he just disappointed me. Maybe it's too much of a personal bias where I expected him to run well and he didn't. So I'm not forgiving it. But it just looks like to me he's not the same horse that we saw this summer.
I should also mention, there are other horses in here that are hardly impossible. I mean, there was a time when Epic Dreamer would have been pretty tough in this race. I know maybe he's a little hard to take in his current form. And even the other Saffie Joseph horse, Yodeliehu, he at one time has run some speed figures that put him in contention here. I think his last race was not his best, and maybe his form's tailed off a little bit, but he certainly has run a lot of races at Gulfstream Park, so I wouldn't completely discount him because there are some question marks about the horses that are going to be shorter prices.
Yeah, and the other horse I wanted to mention was With Verve, and only because we have it flagged as a race with a fast pace, and I really can't argue with that. And he is by far the best late pace horse in here. He's being ridden by Paco Lopez, and his speed figures don't make him impossible either.
No, that's a good point. I wasn't so much viewing him as a win candidate, but he's definitely the kind of horse that could pick up pieces in this race because there are a lot of horses that do want to be forwardly placed in here. Let's finish things up on this podcast by going to Aqueduct and their Sunday card, where they're running the Rego Park for the New York bred, newly turned 3-year-olds going 6.5 furlongs. And I thought this was a pretty high quality race for the New York breds. You've got some horses in here that have run some decent speed figures, some promising runners who are coming off debut wins, some dropping out of some other stakes races. Todd Pletcher seems to have a pretty strong hand in here because he's entered 3 of them, and he's got the horse that I would imagine is going to go off as the favorite, maybe the slight favorite over another horse is coming out of Stakes Company, but the one that I think will take money for Pletcher is the number 3 Uno. This is a horse who cost $255,000 as a 2-year-old in training, made his debut last November at Aqueduct, won pretty impressively by nearly 4 lengths, though that was on a wet track, so he's got to show that he handles a fast track here, but he looks pretty dangerous to me.
Yeah, he's probably the one to beat. I mean, it was a fast maiden race. He got a 94 TimeformUS speed figure that day. And no, none of the horses behind him have actually come back to win. It was only a 5-horse field, I think, but 3 of them have improved their speed figure. Only one was on dirt, but they're all pretty big jumps. So I don't think there is little doubt to me that he's the horse to beat. He had the most talent. He wasn't a surprise that day. And he's got plenty of upside. I should mention there are 3 Todd Pletchers in here. There's also 3 Mike Maker horses in here. So in the 8-horse field, 75% of it's covered by 2 trainers. So you got to take that into consideration as well. I really wanted to look for a price in here. I tried to make a case for New York 1. I was almost ready to make him my top pick, but the more I dug in, I just can't go with him. All his races outside of Mountaineer have been basically terrible, whereas his races at Mountaineer are the ones that look good. My thought was he had run better than looked last time in that stakes race at Aqueduct. It was obviously a really hot pace that day. He kind of packed it in. One of the horses who was coming out of that race has come back to run pretty decently, who was up on the pace in the King Cheek. But I just couldn't get there. So, I mean, if somebody wanted to throw him in as a C-type horse playing horizontals, that's probably what I will do if I play one, but I couldn't make him my top pick. I wound up landing on another Todd Pletcher horse, the one drawn outside in Perfect Munnings. I know he ran on turf last time, but I don't see any reason why this one can't handle dirt. I love the post that he drew in this spot, and I just like the extra half furlong in his running style. So it's not that I love him over Uno. I would make those two my top pick, but I just think he's going to offer some more value.
Yeah, I'm not really against perfect moneys in here. Typically, I would be more inclined to bet against horses like this, but he does really have more of a dirt pedigree, and that maiden race that he comes out of on the turf was fast, and the runner-up Dancing Buck came back and ran a nice race on the dirt in his second start to win. I know it was in the slop, but he still ran well out of that race. So I think Perfect Munnings has some ability. The surface is just the question mark. For both of these horses, though I think more so for Uno, I found a formulator stat that you do want to be aware of. Todd Pletcher with debut winners making their second starts that are New York breds in dirt sprints. He's 9 for 15 over the past 5 years. That's a 60% win rate, 276 ROI. I mean, it really applies to a horse like Uno because most of the horses in that sample are not switching from turf to dirt. They're horses that won their debuts on the dirt. But that's a terrifying win rate for Todd Pletcher. So that just makes me less inclined to go against a horse like Uno, who I do think is squarely the horse to beat, and I do think has plenty of talent. So I guess I'd lean towards making Uno my top pick in here, despite the fact that he's going to be relatively short priced, because I do kind of prefer him to Blue Gator, who seems like the other horse that's going to take money. Blue Gator won that second start at the Finger Lakes against a field that wasn't spectacular, and the third place finisher in there, Thin White Duke, was arguably best after blowing the start by something like 8 or 10 lengths. And last time out, Blue Gator ran fine, but Eagle Orb, who won that race, he's a nice enough New York bred. He came back and disappointed, going a distance that might have been too long for him in the Jerome last week. I just haven't really seen the progression from Blue Gator that I would want to. So I feel like Uno is the one that has more upside. The other Pletcher horse that I think is somewhat interesting coming out of that notebook is the number 6 Storm Shooter, because he got a very odd trip in that race. He had a ton of early speed, secured the front end, then moving to the half-mile pole, Jose Ortiz kind of looked to his right, saw that there were 3 horses outside of him in part of a 4-way speed duel, and he took a hold of this horse as if he was going to sacrifice that inside rail position to try to take back, and the horse completely overreacted to that tactical decision. He kind of threw his head up, reacted really badly to kickback, and took himself out of the race. It actually looked like he was pulling himself up coming on the far turn. Then they got into the stretch. He got to the outside and he started running again and passed a horse and was actually finishing up decently, almost past looking for trouble at the end of that race. So just a weird running line for Storm Shooter. I'm not sure how much ability this horse really has, and there's other speed in this race, so he's not the kind of horse I want to pick on top, but I would use him underneath the other Pletcher horse, Uno, if I was going to play exotics in here.
Yeah, I could see that. I'm glad you brought that up because I had forgotten about it. Looking at his running line, it's really odd looking, but now that you mentioned it, that was a bizarre one to watch, and I'm definitely going to have to give that one another look.
Yeah, the one downside with Storm Shooter is that he's a myracehorse.com stable-owned horse, so I don't know how much value you're going to get on him because all of those horses seem to be overbet. That's all the handicapping we've got in store for this week. We'll be back to do the TimeformUS Pacecast on Tuesday, recapping all of these races. And like we did last week, maybe some maiden allowance winners that catch our eye. There are a lot of those at this time of year with those newly turned 3-year-olds making big step-ups and improving. So we'll look for some of those and talk about all of that on the TimeformUS Pacecast next week. Thanks for listening this week. Remember, you can always catch us on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and stay tuned for the TimeformUS Pacecast on Tuesday.